Good morning and welcome to another ACT Chess Association online event summary stream. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events, or this event now, on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. And the event in question is the ACTCA Wednesday Rapid Tournament. Now, way back in March, we started running a number of online events as none of the chess clubs could meet face to face. But as the chess clubs have slowly gone back, Tuggeranong and the Canberra Chess Club are both back meeting, as well as Street Chess, we're down to one event a week. And even though the events were organised in response to COVID-19 restrictions, a number of players requested that we keep running these events, even once the clubs had gone back. So Wednesday night is currently free for ACT chess clubs, and so I'm still running these ones on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. So last night we had a rapid event. There were 10 players taking part, over 5 rounds on chess.com, and the winner was candidate master Wei Li with a perfect 5 out of 5. In second place was Miles Patterson on 4 out of 5, and in third place was a tie between Kevin Liu, who's a junior player, about 12 years old, and Glenn Ingham, and they both scored 3 out of 5. So the game I've decided to look at today is in fact the game between the gold medalist and the silver medalist, Wei Li versus Miles Patterson, and it ended in obviously a win for Wei Li. So let's get cracking. I'll just bring up my screen and away we go. So e4, e6, as I've said in previous posts and summaries, Miles Patterson, who is black, has played the French defence most of his life, so he's not going to change that now. d4, d5. And I mean, the French is an interesting opening. I don't particularly care for it myself. I might have played it. I played it once by accident is probably the best way of putting it, where in a sense I was trying to play a Sicilian and got tricked into playing a French, and didn't enjoy the experience at all. But the issue about the French, of course, is that after e6 and then d5, black has a couple of different ideas, one of which is obviously very fundamental, which is if the e pawn takes the d pawn, then the e pawn takes the d pawn, and you keep a similar number of pawns in the center, so you keep a central pawn there. And the other one is essentially black will try and attack white's pawn chain by playing a free move like c5. White played knight d2. The other way, of course, knight c3, bishop b4, e5, c5 demonstrates that black's strategy here is to play c5 in an early stage. Instead, knight f6 and e5 just to push the knight back now. It's not quite the same as the advanced variation, but it's reasonably similar. Bishop to d3. So black gets going with the c5 idea straight away, and c3. And the idea, of course, is once again, if there's an exchange of pawns on d4, white will have as many pawns in the center as black. Knight c6 and knight e2. I'm going to give knight e2 an exclamation mark here, even though it's not a particularly surprising move, and in fact it's all part of opening theory. But the main reason I'm giving it an exclamation mark here is that it turns out that the knight on d2 wants to go to f3, so you have both knights defending d4. If, on the other hand, you play knight gf3, like this, which is the more natural move, after c takes, bishop e7, the knight on d2 kind of doesn't have as many obviously good squares. It needs to move to let the bishop on c1 out of the way. But from d2, it's not necessarily in the best location. b3 maybe. If you wanted to be completely crazy, castles, rook e1, knight f1, knight e3 is another idea here. So knight e2 I like, c takes, and then black plays f6. This is still theory, by the way, and the idea, of course, is you want to keep attacking this pawn chain, which is the fundamental idea here of the French in a lot of instances. You just keep hammering away at white's center. E takes f6, knight takes f6. And I've had this position a couple of times, and I've even had this position against Miles. And there are a number of things at play here. The main reason the main issue is that black still has to decide what to do with the bishop on c8, because the pawn on e6 is always holding this one in. e5 is the goal. So white often picks a plan where the e5 square stays under control as well. And then, depending on how quickly you get away with it, white can actually start to pile up pressure on the e6 pawn as well. So castles first, of course, bishop d6 to try and control the e5 square. Knight f3, which again is part of the issue of which knight really does belong on f3. And the main reason here is the knight on d2 is still protecting e4 as well as the knight on e2 and the knight on f3. And someone just tried to ring me. Unfortunately, they didn't realize I was doing a live broadcast. Hopefully, I'll get back to them. Okay, if you're watching and you've tried to ring me, understand, I'll get back to you. Queen c7 was what black played, but let's just have a look at what happens if they try for the e5 break straight away. It turns out this isn't completely disastrous. You end up with a slightly uncomfortable position. Let's just start swapping a few things. Black now has the isolated d-pawn, which they have to worry about. Bishop f4, part of the strategy for white in trying to win this ending now is to start swapping off some pieces. Bishop takes, knight takes. And after castles, queen d2, white has a slight edge, mainly because this pawn on d5 isn't the best. And white's going to either swap pieces off and win it in the ending, or try and gang up onto it. Of course, it is a passed pawn, so black might be able to get something out of it. We don't know yet. So, but anyway, queen c7, g3, castles, and bishop f4. And the idea here was to swap bishops, because basically black's dark square bishop is still doing okay. It's the light square bishop that is horrible. So if we can swap off the dark square bishops, it's good bishop on d3 versus not so good bishop on c8. Knight g4, keeping an eye on e5. It's around here that black starts to unravel a bit. Having said that, there is a little bit of a trick here that kind of knight g4 I think set up, and maybe black was hoping for this one. After, say, a move like rook c1, by no means automatic move, but at least it's getting the rook onto an open file and pinning the knight on c6. I think white's idea may well have been something like bishop takes, knight takes, and then the exchange sack with rook takes. Because after g takes and queen takes, there's now a threat of just taking on d4, because the knight on f3, curiously, is kind of pinned on f3 because of the queen takes h2 mate threat. So you play bishop b5 here, and the idea is now that the queen and the knight are defending. And after bishop d7, the idea is to play rook f8 to put pressure on the f3 pawn. Rook c3, rook f8. And in fact, despite the fact that black is down the exchange, does have a pawn for it, there's enough play in this position for black to get something out of it. I mean, sometimes sacrifices are hard to evaluate in terms of what you get for them. If you don't get a checkmate, you tend to go, well, what's left? In this case, black still has a number of threats, including taking the pawn on d4, because there's also the unpinning threat of the bishop on d7 taking on b5 once the knight moves here. And if the bishop, for example, took on b7, the knight can just capture on f3 with check, and then queen takes h2 is going to be mate. So instead, bishop takes was just sensible and safe. Queen takes there, and then knight c3, basically to defend the knight on f3, which was hanging briefly. And then black really went wrong with a6 here, missing just a tactical trick in this position. e5 could have been tried, and after d takes, knight takes, bishop to e4 is a clever move. Bishop to e6 defends, and then knight takes e5, queen takes e5. And then you can play bishop takes d5 here, because if you start capturing, you basically have just won a nice safe pawn. And if you try and win material by unpinning or pinning the bishop here, white's actually got two relatively safe lines. One is just to take on d6 with check, so that rook takes d1 can't be played. But you can also play the clever queen takes g4, because there's a pin on the bishop on e6, which can't take the queen. And then black control back with playing queen takes d5, because there's no more pin. So if knight takes d5, bishop takes g4 does happen. But instead, a6 to stop the knight from going to b5 seemed to be the thought here. But missed bishop takes h7 check. And this is a good tactic, because after king takes, knight g5, the knight on g4 is under attack. King hops back, and then queen takes g4. So white is better here now, and quite a lot better. So after e5, white went queen h4. I mean, what's not to like about a checkmating threat? But d takes e5 would have been stronger. D takes, for example, if you play queen takes, then queen h5 threatening h7, queen h7, and if you try and block like this, rook e1 is very strong because white is now threatening to take on d5 because queen can't recapture because of queen h7 mate. Just coming back into this position here, you might want to ask yourself, why can't I take the queen? Well, you can, of course. But after this move here, the d pawn is still weak, and the pawn on d7, d6, sorry, is a lot stronger, as long as black can't round it up. So queen h4 was played, so queen h6 is kind of forced here. But now white missed the best line. White went knight takes d5, which turns out not to be the right move. If we play d takes e5 here, which is a lot better, queen takes h4, g takes h4, and say you play d4 here to push the knight. Knight d5 is quite strong, because if you play knight takes e5, bad things happen. You get knight check first, which forces the king in the corner. Then you get f4, which attacks the knight. And when the knight retreats to safety, knight g6 just happens. And you forked king and rook. Better is bishop g4. But even after f3, bishop h5, knight c7 is quite a strong move here. That pawn on e5 is very, very good for white. Instead played knight takes d5. And after the swap of queens, e takes d4. White's up a pawn, but black has slightly more play. And in fact, white's not necessarily up a particularly good pawn, because if you look at the pawn on h4, it isn't that great. So rook a d1, bishop to f5, let's bring some pieces out, knight to c7, rook to c8, knight ce6. But it was at this point that black decided to go wrong. The time limit for this game was 10 minutes each with a 2-second increment. And certainly white tends to use a lot of time, plays a very solid game normally, but uses a lot of time to do it. And black was probably short of time as well. The best strategy at this point is to try and get active. You're down a pawn, but you really need to activate some of your pieces. So bishop takes e6, knight takes here, rook f hitting the knight. And sure, you're giving up another pawn. So it's knight takes d4, but it's really interesting to see black, by being active, get lots of play here. When I first was studying rook and pawn endings in a practical sense years ago, one of the things was active rooks are worth more than pawns in a lot of instances, and this is the case here. So knight takes, rook takes. And we've got a situation here where white is just up 2 pawns. But the 2 rooks can work really well together. So rook c2 is the right idea. Your rook on the 7th is attacking the queenside pawns and potentially attacking the kingside pawns, especially when the other rook joins. Okay, so rook b4 to save the pawn. We go b5, and suddenly that rook doesn't have much mobility. So imagine that white tries to activate the rook a4, just swap, takes, 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 and rook here is the key move. And rookie, so you're threatening just to take the h pawn. King goes to g2. Rook takes here, and 2 against 1 is really difficult to win, and there's only a slight edge for white. In ending was the right for black, and then after knight takes d4, again could have good a second time after knight takes. Pieces on the problems for black, because if you look at the knight on g5, and I'm doing a fantastic job of blocking the squares for this, so you've just got to worry about getting back to rook f8 to block any checks. But white is a little bit better in this position simply because of the knight, I should say. It must be the morning to try and ring me. People are ringing me everywhere. Sorry, I'm just ringing off these phones. Okay, so bishop d7 was played instead, and now knight takes c6, bishop takes e6. And when I was looking at this game, I thought there might be an idea of just sneaking in the rook f4, not so much to hit the h-pawn, as much as to play d4 and come up with some sort of sneaky checkmate. But after rook d4, the f4 square's out of bounds, the rook is nice and active, so good defensive moves are often active defensive moves. So g6, rook fd1, so white now starts to get back and organise themselves. 2 pawns ahead. It's just a question of avoiding any tricks. Rook e8 was probably black's best try here. even after rook d8, we are swapping king g7. King went to g7 first, and so rook here offers the exchange. And again, we get kind of to the same position, rook f5, but f3, rook a5, a3. White is better, not massively better, but 2 pawns, albeit the kingside pawns are pretty ratty, is still a little bit better. So rook goes to c7. Black actually missed a slightly better winning idea here, which was rook e1. White, sorry, I should say, rook e1, because it's very hard to stop the threat of knight d6. Knight e6, forking king and rook in this position. The rook can't move to any safe squares except to e7, d7, but even after this, you're going to walk into this idea, which wins a piece, or an exchange. Once the rook goes back, it wins an exchange and a piece. And everything, basically. So rook e1 was winning, but rook a d6 was okay, especially after black finally fell apart with rook f5, because knight d6 just forks, knight e6 just forks these 2 pieces. And this ended up being the position where black decided they'd had enough. So it was a combative game. White was better, especially after black walked into this little trick of bishop takes h7. Having said that, the follow-up wasn't exact at this point. Knight takes d5. But really, the position here was have faith sometimes in what look like losing endings. You tend to get a little bit more play if you can, especially with the 2 rooks. So bishop takes e6 was the right move, because you were kind of aiming for an ending that looked a little bit like this. So this was the ACT Chess Association's Wednesday Night Rapid Tournament, and it was won by Wei Li, who won this game against Miles Patterson, who came second. So we're back to having once a week events now. So Wednesday night is the night if you want to play some online chess and you're a Canberra chess player. 7 o'clock, chess.com. My name is Sean Press. I organise these events on behalf of the ACT Chess Association. Thanks for tuning in and watching this. By the way, this is on Twitch. It's broadcast live, as you can see by all my mistakes. It stays up on twitch.tv for 2 weeks, but you'd probably know that if you're watching it now. But then I transfer them across soon after to YouTube, so you're able to watch the last couple of months on YouTube as well. So thanks for watching, and until next Thursday around about 10 a.m, I'll be seeing you.